So probably maybe the number one tip for this whole video, and maybe just a tip in life for general for people, is that you have to find a way to. Hello everyone, Jordan here. I am a fourth year medical student at UVA. I am a former teacher and I am a co-founder of NovaCards. Today we are going to be talking about time management in medical school. Sometimes in medical school it can feel like time is your mortal enemy. Like you are always trying to get more time. If you don't spend enough time studying, you're going to do poorly, but it eats up all of your time. You don't have time for anything else. But I've learned some things over my time in medical school. I've learned some things online that I think will be helpful to share with you. And I think together, if we try our best to apply correct principles, we will succeed in medicine, we will succeed in our lives, and we'll be able to be well-adjusted, happy medical students, if such a thing is possible. I have a particularly interesting story when it comes to time management. I'm an older medical student. I'm non-traditional. I had a couple other jobs before this, like being a teacher, like I mentioned. I was married. My wife and I knew we wanted kids, and we didn't want to have a kid in our first year of medical school, so we had my daughter 3 weeks before the first year of medical school started. So I was really thrown into the deep end with having a young child and being a student at the same time. It was very hard. It was harder than I thought it was going to be. But because of that, I was forced to learn as good as I can. Any little thing I could do to save a couple extra minutes, anything that could add up at the end of the day, could help me to do better in school. It could help me to be more present as a father, and it could also help me to be a better husband too. I didn't want my wife to have to do everything. Obviously, she did a lot of work to support me through medical school, but she worked as well, and I wanted it to be as equal as possible. So all of these tips come from trying to learn how to do that. So this guide that I'm going to present to you in this video is going to be a bunch of tips. There's going to be some fundamental things, I think, that we all sort of need to be doing if we are going to be efficient using our time. And then there's going to be many tips that are going to be sort of a choose your own adventure. So these first couple of tips are your fundamentals. I think everyone sort of needs to be doing a version of each of these things to be able to get by in medical school. And the better you can do them, the better you're going to do with your time management as well. So probably maybe the number one tip for this whole video, and maybe just a tip in life for general for people, is that you have to find a way to limit distractions. With the internet, with smartphones, with computers, there's just so much being pushed towards us constantly. With social media, maybe you are watching this video on social media of some kind. That's not always a positive thing. Sometimes it is. But when we are trying to focus and do something challenging and mentally strenuous, like learning medicine, we have to learn how to limit and moderate our use of all of these devices. So the first one's a little harsh, but I feel like it has to be said. You might consider deleting your accounts, or at least pausing your accounts on some of your social media profiles while you're in medical school. Obviously, you're not going to be tempted to go on Pinterest or TikTok or whatever it might be if you don't have an actual account. I know people keep in touch with their friends and a lot of things using these social media accounts, and I do as well. But you're in a really important and time-limited part of your life. It's worth at least considering just pausing the accounts, maybe even giving the account to a friend and saying, hey, change this password, and then I'll just get a new password from you every once in a while. That is a bit extreme, but it's probably the most effective way to reduce your usage of social media. So here's a tip that has been super helpful for me, and that is to take an old iPhone or an old laptop, some sort of device that has internet access, and to just take the browsers off of it, strip it down to the essential functions of the device, and use it for the things that you need a computer for, but you don't want to be distracted on. So what I did was I took this old iPhone. I think I found it in one of our drawers, and I don't even know what model it is or whatever, and I just took all the browsers off of it, and I only added the things on that I thought would be helpful for me getting work done. I would put all of my internet devices away, and I would just work on this. I actually bought a cheap Bluetooth keyboard, and I even wrote all of my residency application essays on that iPhone and just transferred them to my real computer for further editing later. And it was so much easier to get into the flow of writing when I knew I couldn't be distracted even if I wanted to. So it's worth considering just modifying some of the existing devices that you have to make them easier to focus with. Another thing that I've pretty recently gotten into doing, and that is to buy a timed lock. So this is a lock I got on Amazon. I think it was like 15 bucks or something. And you can just put a time in there, say 30 minutes. So I take my computer, I take my iPhone, I take maybe an interesting book, anything that might distract me from my work, and I put it in a bag and I lock the bag. Then I let myself take the time that I need to get the work done. The first couple of minutes after I lock my stuff away is usually kind of a detox. Like I feel like I have to like sort of realize that no one can contact me. I'm not going to get any texts, any emails I have to deal with. And then after that, it's usually really productive. And usually, if let's say I set the timer for 30 minutes, I find myself working well past 30 minutes because it's really pleasant to work on something in a focused way without the possibility of distraction. Finally, there are some applications that you can download that have helped me a lot when I have to use my computer to get some work done. And that there's a couple. There's one called freedom.io and there's another one called Cold Turkey. And these are apps that you can download that allow you to block certain websites or certain applications on your computer. So I might block, let's say, YouTube or Reddit or whatever other distractions that there might be out there, and then I can focus on just getting research done or editing something that I'm writing, whatever it might be. Studies have actually shown that these applications are pretty effective in preventing distraction. So it's research backed, and they're both free to use, at least in their basic versions. It's a really good investment. I think everyone should have something like this to be able to focus more intensely on your studies and avoid distractions. So really, anything we can do to reduce the amount of distractions that we have is going to help us out quite a bit to be more productive and to master our schooling better. The next big strategy that needs to be discussed that everyone should be doing is working efficiently. By this, I mean that the time you put into studying needs to actually be producing the results you want in a relatively consistent way, given that your time is limited. Probably the number one tip for this is to, if you're studying, is to use active study methods. These are things like practice tests, flashcards, discussing things with a classmate, explaining concepts to someone else. There's lots of different active study methods. I can show you some of those. Having a higher percentage of active studying rather than passive studying is going to get you more efficiently to master the material that you need. Some pitfalls that you might encounter when trying to work efficiently in medical school in particular are, number one, using 100% Anki and nothing else. I sort of fell into this pitfall a little bit. I used probably more Anki than I should have during medical school. There's just so many other active study methods and even passive study methods that can get you to where you need to be. And if you diversify the ways that you learn, you're going to master your material a bit better. So relying solely on one method of studying is just not efficient, and you're going to end up spending more time kind of getting less gains out of this one method of studying rather than diversifying and getting more gains. Another pitfall is using only pre-made Anki decks for your studying. There's a lot of material that is going to be specific to your individual medical school. You're going to need to spend a little bit of time learning that. There's different methods for doing this. You can ask around to see what the best way to do it is. Maybe you would make your own Anki cards. Maybe you would just have a review of the lectures, whatever it might be. But only studying the pre-made decks is probably not going to get you to where you want to be, at least for your in-house exam. Another pitfall is not relying on other students to figure out how to master the specific learning environment of your actual medical school. So it's really good to talk to friends, especially older classmates that have some experience, and see what they're doing to master the material, see what you can learn from them. And there's no points for being a hero and going it on your own. Really, it's best to work collaboratively and to try to master this material together. Finally, maybe the biggest of these fundamentals is consistency. So by consistency, I mean every day you're going to do something that's getting you closer to mastery of this medical knowledge. I know a lot of students, even in my own medical school, who are very smart, obviously, because they're here in medical school, but they will like not study at all until like the week before a test, which is just bonkers to me. Like, and then the week of the test is just terrible for them. They're so miserable. And even if they had put in a couple hours a day up until that point, they would have been in a much better place. I think if you get yourself in the habit of putting in the time, even if it's minimal on the weekends or whatever it might be, the path towards getting where you want to be is just going to be a lot smoother. You are going to have more time on the weeks that you're busier, because they're going to be busier weeks. And you are going to just be in a much better place mentally. And it's just going to work out a lot better. So just be consistent every day, work every day. Okay, now we're getting into some of the individual tips that I have. Like I said, some people will resonate more with some of these, some people will resonate more with other tips. So these tips will probably overlap a little bit with each other as well, but they each have a different angle that they're going after, or maybe a different emphasis. So whatever resonates the most with you, whichever concept you think is the most useful, pick and choose, and let's see how you like it. For convenience sake, I've lumped these into two categories. One is things that you're doing to yourself that are bad, that you should stop doing. And the other is new strategies that you might be able to employ. So let's start with things that you are doing to yourself that you should probably stop doing. The first is a very common mistake that I'm guilty of, and probably everyone is, and that's seeking breadth instead of depth when it comes to the activities you're engaged in. So it's really tempting in medical school, because we know that we're applying to residency, to do as many cool clubs, as many cool groups, as many research projects as we can get our hands on, because we know that the numbers are going to look good on our application. However, I've found that because if you're engaged in many different activities, there's a switching cost when you have to transfer between activities. So let's say you're focused on doing research with this one professor, and then you're like, okay, I have 30 minutes to do this, and then I have to go research with this other professor. So when you switch between those two activities, it takes a while for you to really get in the headspace to work on that second activity. And if you have too many things you're switching between, you're always constantly kind of getting in the groove. You're never really hitting your stride. I've found that it's much better to have a couple of activities and go really, really far with each one. So let's say studying is one activity. I'm going to take 5 hours this afternoon and really study, get in the weeds of these pulmonary diseases, for instance. Or I'm going to have a couple hours, I'm really going to get into the weeds of writing this research project. Doing that will get you a lot farther than going shallow on a bunch of things, and you'll be able to accomplish more that looks more interesting when you're applying to and trying to get into residency later on. Another thing that happens a lot in medical school that I've seen several times is taking shortcuts with your own health. Medical school is a really stressful time, and it can bring out mental and health problems that otherwise might have been hidden. I know several friends that have been diagnosed with ADHD in medical school. That means they got through all of their high school and undergraduate education excelling and having ADHD, but they were just so smart that they were able to sort of overcome that. You get to medical school and the amount of information is so huge that you can't really do that anymore. Another big one that I've seen also is substance abuse. Medical school is really stressful, and sometimes we can turn to things that are not healthy to deal with that stress. That can really get in the way of your studies. And finally, maybe the most talked about health problem in medical school, unfortunately, is anxiety and depression. First of all, if you are suffering from these things yourself, if you're feeling like meaninglessness in your life, like you can't get out of a rut, like you might be depressed, you should contact the number I'm putting on the screen right now, because it's a serious problem and it can be treated. Because depression is such a big deal in medical school, it can really distract from your studies. It's bad for your health, it's bad for those around you, and it really needs to be treated. Whatever health problem you have in medical school, it's worth it to take care of it, to get it under control, because if you're not operating at 100%, it's going to be really hard to be on top of your studies, to do well, and it's going to be a big distraction from having the time that you want to take advantage of this unique time in your life. Apart from actual medical issues that can be diagnosed and treated, another shortcut that a lot of medical students take is just ignoring their health and fitness. I kind of think of your general health in medical school as three things: fitness, sleep, and nutrition. Each of them have their importance. Fitness, it's important to get a workout in, to be consistent. You're not going to have your full amount of energy if you don't take care of your body, if you don't get in a run or a walk or go to the gym, whatever it might be. So even if it's quick, a 20-minute jog, you got to get something in just about every day. You're going to deal with stress better. It's just going to be so much better, and you're going to have a lot more extra time. It's time that gives back if you invest in your fitness. Sleep is another big thing that a lot of medical students really skimp on. I know one friend in particular that often slept only a couple hours a night. I just can't imagine how she got through school at all. You actually learn, your body helps to consolidate memories when you sleep. So it just doesn't make sense to skip sleep to be able to study more. Like that whole paradigm doesn't really work. It's much better to get the amount of sleep that you need for your body to be at 100%. So you can do the best in your clinical work, and also you can retain your information a lot better. The final thing is nutrition. A lot of us take shortcuts with nutrition in medical school. You're kind of playing a long game with nutrition. Like if you eat really poorly, it probably will affect you worse later on in your life than right now necessarily, but there are certain things that can affect you. Like if you eat a lot of sugary snacks, your blood sugar can crash later on in the day, and it's much better just to eat healthy things and take care of your body the best you can, even if you have to take shortcuts every once in a while. Another really big issue that I've seen, and I'm sort of guilty of myself sometimes, is ignoring the support that you have at your medical school for academic issues. Many medical schools have faculty members or other personnel that their whole job is to help you to learn more efficiently. It's totally worth your time often to meet with them, to say, hey, I'm struggling with this concept, or what do you think about this study strategy, whatever it might be. They've seen tons and tons and tons of other medical students just like you, and so they know what works and what doesn't work. In medical school, the amount of information is so huge, and it's so different than sort of everything else that we've learned before, that there's no shame in having to talk to someone and taking on their experience to help craft a study plan that works best for you. Another thing that can free up a bunch of time in medical school is refraining from engaging in low yield recovery activities. So we all need breaks during the day. We all need time to recharge our batteries, but that time can be spent really efficiently, as in you're going to feel much better after you spend that time, or it can be spent really inefficiently, as in you spend a bunch of time doing something and you're like, wow, I feel exactly the same. One low yield recovery activity that's very common is scrolling on your phone or watching Netflix. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do these things, but I often find, and the research backs me up, that engaging in that is not nearly as effective as, say, going for a jog, like I mentioned earlier, spending time with friends or family, taking a walk outside, reading a book. There's lots of activities that we can do to recover that are going to really give us the energy that we need to go back. Whereas if you're watching something on the internet or whatever it might be, you kind of can end up spending a lot of time and still not really feeling good. So it sucks up a bunch of time, doesn't give you the recovery that you need. Much better to engage in higher yield recovery activities. So that's a list of the things that you might be doing to yourself. Now here's a list of new strategies that you can potentially employ to get ahead on your time management. So the first thing that I'm going to suggest is something that I've done for years that I don't even know where I learned about this, in a book or something somewhere. So all it is taking a list of all the activities you want to get done, and then putting a 1 next to the most important one, putting a 2 next to the second most important one, putting a 3 next to the third, and on. This is helpful for a number of reasons. The first is that you're going to be focusing on the most important tasks to get done. So you're going to be doing the highest yield things first. The second is that I find that just deciding what to do next can often take up a lot of time. Like if there's 10 things on your list, you get sort of paralyzed by trying to decide what's the next most important thing. So even if there is just a random order of things, it's just helpful because you're going to not have to decide what to do next. You can just go on from one item to the next really quickly. So this has been super helpful for me during my time as a teacher, in medical school, anything else I've done in my life. Another thing that can help with your time management is to actually use a calendar. I'm not particularly good at using a calendar, but when I was good at using a calendar, I often used a paper version of a calendar. That's because I would write down the items that I needed to get done on each individual day, including any appointments that I actually had to keep, let's say a doctor's appointment or something that I actually had a time associated with it. And then once I got to that day, I would prioritize the to-dos, like a prioritized to-do list, like I mentioned earlier. Then I could always be focusing on the high yield activities for each day. Anyways, keeping a calendar can be useful, especially keeping track of individual events. There's a ton of them, and it's worth looking into one if you don't use them. Another really important tip is placing an emphasis on deep work. Deep work is a concept from Cal Newport, whose work has influenced a lot of this video. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown University, and he did wrote a lot of books on efficient studying, how to perform well in college, various other things like that. One of his more influential books recently is called Deep Work, and it focuses on how if you take a lot of time and really focus on accomplishing one really important task, your results over time, if you do that day after day, are going to be a lot better than if you're constantly switching between smaller tasks. Where this really applies in medicine, in particular, is with studying. It's much better to be able to take a big chunk of time and say, I'm going to get through all of these practice questions, or I'm going to flip through all of these flashcards, rather than taking 15-minute chunks and trying to get a couple done. Another way this can apply that's really useful is in creative work. And in particular, I'm thinking of writing research papers in medical school. Sitting down with a 5-hour chunk, you're going to get a lot more done, in my experience, than if you take 5 1-hour chunks. Because you have to remember where you were, like you have to find the file. Sometimes you can't find it. Whatever it is, there's switching costs for each of those 5 1-hour chunks. So he wrote a really good book called Deep Work about this concept. Worth a read or a listen. I'll show you the name of that book and you can check it out. Another one that I've found really helpful is to schedule your work around your energy cycle. So some people are morning people, some people like to work in the evening. Whatever it is, I like to take that time where I'm at my peak energy, and that's when I'm going to do the big bulk of my work for the day. I'm definitely a morning person, so I like to wake up early, and I like to get to work early and just use that energy that I have. It's like I usually feel more optimistic, more positive in the morning. So when I look at, say, 100 UWorld questions, I don't have as much depression or like a daunting, overwhelmed feeling. So yeah, whatever it is, if you like to work in the evening, if you like to work in the morning, try to schedule your days so that you can use that energy to really hit your tasks that are the most important as hard as you can during the day. Another concept that is going to be familiar to medical students that we've talked about previously on this channel is spaced repetition. The most common way to do spaced repetition is Anki, but spaced repetition is any form of reviewing previous material in a systematized way, so that when you get to the end right before a test, you've already reviewed and that material has really sunken in. If you do Anki, if you do just review your notes every week, whatever it might be, doing that will help you to spend less time actually studying overall, and so you'll have a little bit more time back that you can use on other tasks. Another way that you can be more efficient with your time is to work with others, especially when it comes to studying. I wasn't particularly good at this in medical school either, and I wish I would have been better about it, but some people really do well working with other people. They can learn concepts more quickly. They can see where their holes in their knowledge are more easily. And it's just there's a lot of opportunities to do active learning strategies when you work with other people. So it's really worth considering getting a study group, something like that, to be able to learn more efficiently with others. Another strategy that I've employed a lot over the years, and it's particularly helpful for clinical rotations, is just sort of standing up for yourself and treating yourself like an adult. If you have not gotten to your clinical rotations yet, you will find a time that you are sitting in an office somewhere in the hospital and you are waiting to be released from your clinical duties, and it's clear that you are not doing anything productive, and it's clear that you're not going to learn anything for the rest of the day, but you're just kind of sitting there. And usually what happens is the doctor has just forgotten you're there, and it's wasting your time. And I think we can be scared to thinking like, this person that's going to give me a grade, whose opinion of me might have some bearing on my future. It's tempting to think I should just defer to them and just whatever they say, I'll just listen to them, or it's tempting to be shy around someone like that. But it's much better, in my opinion, to assume that you're an adult, that you know what's best for you, and to say, hey, is there anything else I can do to be helpful here today? Hey, if you don't mind, I have some studying I'd like to get done at home. Is there anything else I can do? Whatever it is, just communicate openly with them about your needs. The vast majority of the time, they will respect that and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you were here, or oh, I'm sorry, like there's one more thing I wanted you to look at this afternoon. Whatever it is, just treat yourself respectfully and assume that you're an adult when you're talking to your colleagues, and then that can save you hours of time if you get out early and you can study more efficiently at home. Okay, so here's another concept that's pretty interesting. It comes from a time management book. I think it was written in the 80s, and it's called Eating the Frog. And so the idea behind this book is that if you were to eat a live frog, it would be very unpleasant. So it'd be slimy, it'd be gross, you wouldn't want to do it. Every day there's some task that we have to do that is very unpleasant, that is hard, but is really important. And what the author says in this book is every day you should wake up early, and the first thing you should do every day is to eat the frog. Whatever your frog is for the day, just get in the habit of knocking it out first thing in the morning. And then the rest of the day, you've already won the day, and the rest of the day is just kind of a bonus. For me, especially during clerkships, my frog was my UWorld questions. I often had a lot to get through each day. And so I would just get up really early, even before my clerkships if I could, and just crank out as many as I could. I would just eat the frog. Another great thing about this is if you run into an issue while you're, quote, eating your frog in the morning, there's the rest of the day that you can recover from that. You have the whole day to get the most important thing done. And yeah, it's just a great strategy to get on top of the most important task that you have each day. Another rule that I really love is called the 1 minute rule. And I don't know where I learned about this. I think maybe my mom told me about it. But anytime that you run into a task that's like maybe a little task that you might have to remember later, emailing someone, filling out a form, whatever it is, if you run into a task that takes less than a minute, the 1 minute rule says you should just do that task immediately, no matter what you're doing. This can be really helpful for someone like me who can tend to forget things occasionally. I often think of this when I remember something like, oh, I need to change the appointment date that I have set for that, or I should confirm that I have an interview on this date, whatever it is. If you go on, just take care of that task immediately, your to-do list is going to be a lot shorter. You're going to be a lot less stressed trying to get through all the things that you have in your day. This next tip is one that I've used for years, and it's kind of all the rage these days, but I think it's for good reason. It's quite useful, and that's to have a morning routine. So a lot of these strategies in this video are about taking care of your whole self, about getting the most important things done early in the day, about prioritizing. All those things can be done all at once in a morning routine. And the great thing about a routine is once you get in the habit of doing it, you don't even have to think about it. So you can sort of automate doing all these things that give you extra time in the rest of the day. So maybe your morning routine, let's say you're stressed and you're like, you know what, I'm going to use meditation to try to deal with that stress. And in order to make sure you do it every day, you just meditate for 10 minutes right after you wake up every day. And then you say, well, I also hate doing my UWorld questions and I know I have to do them, so I'm going to get up, I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to do 30 UWorld questions after that. And the great thing about that is if it's a habit, you are going to get through so many UWorld questions, you're going to do so much meditation, your life as a whole is going to shift when you do that routine repeatedly. So this is an interesting tip that I've sort of found myself doing myself, and it's a little weird, but I'm going to share it with you anyways. So we all remember activation energy from chemistry. That's when a reaction is net energetically favorable. So it should proceed over time, but there's a hump of energy that the reactants need to get over the activation energy so that the reaction can happen. I.e., you need something powering, something giving some juice into the equation to get things to move forward in the direction that you want them to. I find myself needing some activation energy with certain tasks that are usually really dull and really boring and maybe repetitive. So one thing that comes to mind is like data entry for research. If I'm just doing manual data entry and there's no other way to do it, it's really, really boring for me to just sit there at my desk and do it. So what I like to do is give myself a little treat as some activation energy. I think it can actually be useful to turn on a Netflix show or to put on a YouTube or eat a treat, whatever it might be. Anything that can get you excited that you can pair with that initial really boring task can actually make that task a little bit more palatable. And I've actually saved hours of time because I tend to procrastinate if I don't add in the activation energy first of all. And you might be able to get done with whatever boring task it is a lot more quickly if you add something fun to just sort of power it on. Another great way that you can save some time is by task batching. So I like to take a lot of the tasks that I have to get done, especially around the house, and just do them all at once. This is sort of like deep work, but for household items. Let's say that every week I have to fold laundry, I have to sweep the floor, and I have to feed myself for lunches every week. It would be tempting to maybe want to split those things apart because you don't want to spend a ton of time doing them all at the same time, but doing them all together will save you time in the end. In particular, I'm thinking of meal batching. So making a big pot of rice and throwing in a bunch of food and having that for lunch every day is going to save you a ton of time overall. If you pair that with your other household chores, then you might not have to do any housework during the rest of the week. So just consider, whenever you can, batching things together. It cuts down on switching costs. It's going to help save you time in the end. This next strategy is interesting, but it can be helpful. And that it's something I learned from the book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And the concept is that in order to get big, important things done, sometimes you need to let small, bad things happen. So really, this is just giving yourself permission to really focus on the important tasks that you have each day and let some smaller things fall by the wayside. Those smaller things might be answering emails really promptly. They might be responding to a survey that you got. It might be even filling out like evaluations for classes, whatever it might be. You should be respectful to the people around you, but this is a really important time of your life. And if you need to let some things fall through the cracks so that you can get your year-old questions done for the day, or you can get your research paper done on time, it's totally a valid thing to maybe apologize later if you need to, and focus on the big important things. So yeah, just be respectful of other people's time, but if it's a small inconvenience, it's maybe better to let that happen than to not accomplish one of your big tasks for the day. This next one is a common study technique for medical students. It's called the Pomodoro technique. It basically involves chunking up your daily tasks into small groups and taking breaks in between. So a common schedule for a Pomodoro might be 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break, 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break, 25 minutes of work, and then 25 minutes of break. So you're kind of chunking out your work into small amounts, and you always know that there's a break coming eventually. I found this to be particularly helpful when I had lots and lots of Anki cards to get through. So cranking out 25 minutes of Anki felt a lot better than just sitting there for hours trying to do all of my Anki at once. It's just a good way to help you stay focused, to give your brain a little bit of pause, to reset. And you can also schedule other activities in those breaks that might be helpful, as we will talk about in a second. So as I mentioned before, recovery time can be high yield or low yield, as in high yield recovery helps you actually feel better and recovered after you do it, and low yield recovery just makes you feel a little crappy after you've watched YouTube for an hour. Another way to make recovery time productive is to actually use it to get something else done. So a good example of this is putting away dishes might actually feel really good after doing Anki for half an hour. Just does something physical with your hands. You don't have to look at a screen. That way you are taking a break and you are being productive at the same time. Do that a couple of times a day, you've saved yourself a half hour at the end of the day, and that can be really useful. Probably the best way that I used this strategy, though, throughout my years was during my longer breaks in my Pomodoro sessions. If I had like a half-hour break, I would actually get my exercise done during that time. And so instead of sitting down and watching music videos on YouTube, I would actually go get a run, and I would feel so much better after getting a run in than if I had just sat down and done something else more sedentary. And the great thing about this was at the end of the day, I would have an extra half an hour every single day that I otherwise would have used just taking a non-productive break. Another thing that was surprisingly difficult for me in medical school was decision fatigue. You're probably familiar with this concept. It's that humans actually have only a certain number of decisions that they can make throughout the day effectively. And if you make more and more decisions, it's going to become harder and harder to make decisions. Anki cards, for me, each one of those was a decision. So if I had 700 Anki cards to get through, that was 700 decisions I had to make each day. And it was really hard for me to make any other decisions, which can be hard in the evening if you're like doing financial planning or something like that, which my wife always wanted to do. So one way to get around this is just to limit the number of decisions that you have to make. In extreme cases, you could limit the outfits that you have to wear each day. You could always have meals pre-prepared so that you don't have to think about what you want to eat for lunch every day. There's a number of different ways you can limit the decisions that you have to make. But keeping them down, keeping the number of decisions that you have to a reduced level during medical school is pretty helpful. And it can help you to feel a little bit less fatigued when you have to crank through a bunch of flashcards or practice questions during the day. Another thing that you can do that can be really enlightening is to track how you spend your time each day. There's a couple of apps that help us do this. There's one called Rescue Time that's available online, and another one is the Screen Time app that iPhones have, and there's probably one for Android as well. Just seeing what apps you use each day and where you spend your time can be really enlightening and can help you to know where things are slipping through the cracks, or if there's any way that you might be able to optimize how you use your devices. Another tip that I learned in a book called How to Be a Straight A Student by Cal Newport, which is a great book, by the way, is to get ahead on the weekends. So a lot of people take Saturday and Sunday completely off, and that's fine, especially if that helps you recover. But it can be really nice to, say, take half a day on Saturday and really just get ahead for your next week. Maybe you do all of your pre-reading for your lectures. Maybe you get some of the homework assignments done that you need to, whatever it might be. That takes the pressure off the rest of your week and can make it easier to get through the week. It's a little bit harder to do this in medical school. I find that everyone's sort of just working all the time, but it's potentially a strategy you could look into if you find yourself with some time on the weekends. Another strategy is to just rely more heavily on your support network, whether that's friends, parents, whatever it might be. Now is a really busy time of our lives. It's okay if your parents say, do your laundry on the weekends. It's okay if one of your roommates who's not in medical school does more of the cleaning in your apartment, if they're okay with that. Just know that this is a temporary time in your life that's really intense, and if you are accepting some help from others to get you through this time and that saves you time during the week, that's okay, and you should take advantage of that if it's available. Another strategy that is common with many medical students and can be helpful or not helpful is just watching your lectures at home. Obviously, one benefit for this is that you don't have to go into school each day, so there's no commute time. Another benefit is that you can usually watch them on a faster playback speed than if you were there in person. So if you have 4 hours of lectures each day, watch them on 2 times speed, it's only 2 hours of lectures. Some people really prefer to learn in person, and I think that's fine. Just keep in mind that this is an option that's available. Another strategy that is pretty interesting that I want to explore more is trading time for money. So money is pretty limited in medical school, obviously, but we do have some money, and even small purchases can make a big difference. For instance, my house that we're renting does not have a dishwasher, and so we got a little countertop dishwasher for like $200, and that has saved hours and hours and hours of work. Whatever it might be, look into ways that you can maybe buy a Roomba or some other item that is going to save you time, and that is almost certainly worth an investment, even if it might seem a little expensive now, given that you're on a medical school budget. This next one is really interesting. I also got this from the 4-hour work week, I think. This is called Parkinson's law. And this was a law that was discovered by a naval historian, which is that work tends to expand to whatever time that you assign to it. So let's say that you are creating a PowerPoint presentation for a research paper, and you say, I'm going to give myself 2 hours to do this on Friday. Well, if you give yourself 2 hours, it's probably going to take 2 hours. If you want to save time though, you should only give yourself a really tight amount of time. Give yourself half an hour. And if you give yourself half an hour, you'll be surprised how much you can get done in that half hour. And one caveat for this strategy is that you're probably going to want to do this on work where the quality doesn't matter so much. It would be a bad idea, for instance, to write your personal statement for residency in half an hour, but it might be a good idea to do it for a presentation for a pass-fail class that is quite easy and doesn't necessarily need to be the highest quality. Another strategy that can be really helpful is to ask yourself impossible questions. So impossible questions just kind of get your mind thinking in a way that it might not otherwise have thought. One way you can do this is to say, I don't want to spend any time doing laundry for the rest of medical school. How can I do that? Or I want to only spend 2 hours a day studying. What would it look like if I only spent 2 hours a day studying? You might not actually want to spend 2 hours a day studying, but by focusing on what it might look like if you only had 2 hours a day to study, you might be able to identify what aspects of studying are the most efficient. Similarly, you could ask yourself something like, I don't want to have any commute for the rest of the year. What would that look like? Asking yourself impossible questions gets your mind thinking in creative ways that can help get you to solutions much more quickly. Despite all of these time management strategies, you might come to a place where you are still struggling to get through everything that you need to get done. My advice for you, if you're in that place, is when in doubt, just start your day earlier, get up earlier, get things done earlier. One of the reasons why this is effective is because there's less distractions in the morning. I did this in particular on the weekends when I had a lot of stuff to do with my family and my daughter. It was just easier if I got up and went even to school for a few hours and just cranked through a bunch of studying. If I tried to study and be at home at the same time, it just didn't work out very well. There was less distractions if I got up earlier in the morning, and that just tended to work better for me. So if you're struggling in any way, just consider getting up even earlier. Another strategy is to shorten your commute. Commutes are just not productive at all, really. It's just time that's wasted every day, and people aren't particularly happy when they commute. It's just not really a good use of time. So anything you can do to shorten it is useful. Moving closer to the hospital is one thing. Maybe paying for a nicer parking pass could be another thing. My favorite, though, is commuting by bike, if you're close enough to do that to the hospital. The nice thing about bikes is you can ride them right up to where you have to go, usually on campus. Maybe there's a place to put your bike right by the hospital entrance instead of parking kind of far away and having to walk. And you can often get around traffic a lot more easily with a bike. If you don't have a bike or don't want a bike, that's fine. There's other things you can do. You can do e-bikes, or you can do electric scooters. There's lots of options. But any sort of device that you have that you can ride on the road, park where you park bikes, is usually going to be a lot more efficient than commuting by car. If you can't get around commuting, you could try to use your commute to get some extra work done. So let's say you're commuting using public transportation. That's a great time to study. You can also listen to a lot of audio that is helpful. I'm particularly fond of the Divine Intervention podcast for reviewing medical concepts. However you want to use it, finding a way to use your commute time can be pretty helpful. I used to commute via bus to campus, and I would get about 15 minutes to campus of studying done and about 15 minutes back home. So that was about half an hour every day of studying I didn't have to do otherwise. And that's half an hour that I can play with my daughter, or I can help my wife with dinner, whatever it is. That was really useful time. So this is a really helpful browser extension that was suggested to me by a classmate. It's called the Video Speed Controller browser extension. This is particularly helpful for a number of reasons. The first is that it just makes it easier to speed up videos. So instead of having to click on an icon and just select whatever speed you want, you usually use shortcuts on your keyboard. So you push the D button to speed it up, for instance. So it's just easier to speed up your videos. You can watch whatever videos you need to watch more quickly in an easier way. The other reason it's helpful is that there are some videos that don't give you the option to speed them up that you can be sped up with this browser extension. So I'm thinking particularly of mandatory trainings and stuff like that I had to do in medical school. Speed them up with the extension, and you can cut that training time in half and save some time. Another add-on for Anki that's particularly helpful in this regard can be the Speed Focus add-on. This one will flip your Anki cards over automatically, and then it will either answer them correct or incorrect automatically, depending on what you set the add-on to do. So it can help you flip through cards more quickly. It doesn't let you get distracted, because if you get distracted during an Anki session, it's going to flip the cards. There's a number of issues with this. Obviously, if you're going through the cards super quickly, you might not be retaining them as well. And then also, it can be just exhausting to just crank through so many Anki cards using a speed focus add-on like that. So use this one with caution. I think it's particularly helpful when it comes to maybe concepts that you've studied a lot already that you're pretty familiar with. You just need to review them one more time. But it can really save you a lot of time with your Anki cards, that's for sure. Finally, another one that is kind of painful to do but can save you time is to combine exercising and studying. One setup that I've heard that I think would be particularly useful for this is like walking on a treadmill, having an iPad, and then using an Anki mote to study Anki on the treadmill. I've done it on my exercise bike while doing Anki on my phone or watching a lecture. It kind of sucks to exercise and study at the same time, because exercising is fun. And so it takes all the fun out of it, but it can save you a bunch of time. So if you're in a pinch, this can get you some extra time to get you through the day. Another way you can save time that we are particularly fond of at NovaCards is by using technology. NovaCards is an app designed to make studying with Anki in particular more efficient. What NovaCards does currently, it will soon do much more, is to find Anki cards that are relevant to your lectures instantaneously, so you don't have to go through and pick out individual Anki cards. It will also create Anki cards from your lecture content instantaneously, and just help to get you studying, doing more active studying as quickly as possible. So there's a bunch of study tips for you. If you are looking for more information, there's a couple of books that I would suggest. The most important one I would say is How to Be a Straight A Student by Cal Newport. It's a great book. It kind of goes through a survey of a bunch of high achieving students and the strategies they use, and kind of breaks down exactly how you might use those strategies in your own studying. Another book is Deep Work by Cal Newport. That can really give you some ideas for how to get more deep into the things that you do and be more productive. And I'll throw up a couple other books that you might find useful as well. So those are my tips for time management. What did you think about them? Are there things I'm missing? Are there some tips that I told you here that you've tried that you don't like? What other ways could we try to manage our time more efficiently? Is this even worth it? Should we just try to give up and just say medical school is hard and just let our lives be crazy? I don't know. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear. Please like and subscribe for more.